welcome to the stage Paige Harlock, Manager, Youth Entrepreneur and Partnerships at CGLCC.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's been so lovely to meet many of you in person for the first time. It's been a dream, so thank you so much for joining us today. As a quick reminder, you will be able to see all of the speaker bios, virtual exhibits, and additional information on our event website. If you want to check that out, there's a few QR codes on the back of your program and some of the signage around the event. But now we're going to get into the next session, so please join me in welcoming the next panel with your moderator, Jaymin Luces-Mendes, founder and managing director of Toni Marlow Clothing and Noire Now.
May you have auspiciousness and causes of success. May you have the confidence to always do your best. May it take no effort in your being generous, sharing what you can, nothing more, nothing less. May you know the meaning of the word happiness. May you always lead
Be
from
so
the
nice to
beginning.
say.
May you be treated like an esteemed guest.
Cool. And I chose the spot right in front of the lights. Well, hello everyone. Hi. And thanks for being here. Thanks for having myself. I am old school, so I will be using paper. Please let me know if it becomes too crumply and crinkly and distracting. But I'm very excited to be here with Naoufel and Thomas, who are just awesome individuals. And so for that reason, I'm going to let you all actually introduce yourselves before we jump into this panel.
My name is Naoufel Testaouni. I am the co-founder and CEO of an organization called QueerTech. It's a nonprofit that started in Montreal, and we help LGBT people to get into the tech industry, advance their career in tech, and launch tech businesses. And as of yesterday, we launched in Toronto, so I'm really excited to do that, and also met a lot of folks here. Quick background, I'm Moroccan originally. Moved here in 2011. You'll get to hear a little bit more of my story and how I got here in this conversation today.
Awesome.
Thank you. So I'm Thomas Sasso. I use the pronouns they, them, and he, him. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Guelph at our Lang School of Business and Economics. So if you're wondering who smells like cows and horses, that's me. Just to clarify, if you don't know Guelph, it's an agricultural space. Don't just naturally. Sorry, folks. A little bit about me. So I teach and I do research in the areas of equity, diversity, and inclusion, leadership, and human resources. In terms of my identities, I'm a white settler on this land. I live with multiple invisible disabilities, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about what that looks like and means in terms of this topic and what inclusion is. And I'm also an individual who's genderqueer and agender. And so those are things that will also filter in as we talk about these important discussions today.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for sharing. And again, I'm dead named myself. I'm Jaymin Luces-Mendes. I recently transitioned. I'm non-binary. My pronouns are they, them, and my clothing company, Toni Marlow, makes undergarments for folks who redefine gender norms. So we have like period boxers, packer boxers, things like that, and we donate to suicide prevention on every purchase. And my new company that I'm slowly starting to tell people about, which will be ready soon, is called Noire Now. And it's basically a Google extension that allows you to shop black first by it automatically telling you if whatever you're searching for has a black-owned option. So hopefully you can check that out soon, and let's get into it.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. So what does intersectionality mean to you? Let's start in the beginning.
Love it. Starting deep right away. I love it. So I was thinking about this question, and I realized before I define intersectionality, I want to touch base quickly on identity. And the reason why it's because we all identify differently, right? If you ask me, I would say I'm a queer person, Moroccan, immigrant, Arab, right? And there's different sides to this. And this is really important because we're trained to always just fill in one box, right? You get to fill a government form or whatever form, you're always asked in some demographic, and you'll fill one or two, and you might not identify with those. And QueerTech did this research study to understand LGBTQ experiences in tech, and actually in that survey we launched, we couldn't agree how to put identity. And so we decided to leave it open and ask people to answer, and we had about 220 valid survey responses that we looked at. And it was fascinating to look at. Guess how many categories we had? About 220 categories. So every single person who answered that survey have actually identified differently. Not one single answer was similar to the other. And that was really interesting because it really brings us to talk about intersectionality. And really the definition is that we all carry privileges, or our privilege, and our disadvantage. And it all plays in different situations. And so depend the situation you're in, that privilege come into. Now, what's interesting is when you look at the identity and the different sides to it, the way I would experience homophobia, racism, xenophobia is going to be different than how each one of you experience it. But yet, the way we look at discrimination is often like it's a one facet. Oh, he's been discriminated against, and kind of like looking at it as it's like this one line or it's a dot, and that's how we try to understand it. But really, it doesn't take in consideration that, you know, it's probably a hexagon of things, right? And depend on the situation, depend where you look at it, that experience is gonna impact the discrimination that happened will experience depend on the experience the person have lived throughout their life.
Just right out the gate, like. I love it. Thank you very much for that. I mean, it makes sense. I'm still kind of stuck on, you had each single survey was a different one. Like there was no overlap at all, but exactly to what you're saying in terms of, you know, how I might perceive or experience the same discrimination is going to be completely different from you, even if we experienced it at the same time at an event together, because the context of how you grew up and what you know and have already experienced is going to be completely different. Whereas, you know, the manager, let's say, at set of fake event might come in and handle the situation completely differently because they have a whole other set of knowledge or experience. And so it's just to show, you know, we're so different and unique, but we all have this thing that we're working through to, I believe we're all trying to just find a way to be better humans. Absolutely. And, you know, I'm very curious to hear a little bit more also from you, Thomas, in terms of like the research that you do and have done, and also how that impacts with your experience. As you said, like intersectionality for you looks a little different because you're not visibly a minority, right? So what has that been like for you?
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And so for me, intersectionality was really a difficult term at first to try to understand within my lived experience, because here were all of these invisible elements that, you know, were part of how I saw myself, but the world around me wasn't seeing that. And so that's a complicating factor when we're thinking about our employees, when we're thinking about our customers and clients is, you know, we have to be willing to go beyond the visible, beyond the surface level in understanding one another. And so intersectionality, if we go back to Kimberly Crenshaw's, you know, coining of this in 1989, you know, the purpose of it was intersectionality was a tool of analysis. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is something that we want to keep in mind, that we're, you know, using it to help us understand. It's a tool to help us understand each other and ourselves. And so in the research that I've done, very similar to the survey, you know, we encourage individuals to express, you know, how do you determine for yourselves what's central to your identity? Because that's going to change over time. Depending on the situation you're in, part of intersectionality indicates, you know, in this circumstance, in this room right now, you know, some of my disabilities are much more central to me, you know, because of the lights that are shining on, whereas in the hallway, that's not as much of a, you know, a central part of how I see myself or experience the world. And so intersectionality as that analytic tool, as that device, gives us the opportunity to understand the richness of why differences of experiences occur. And so when I'm with my students, they often say, well, I'm white and I'm able-bodied and I'm straight, so intersectionality doesn't apply to me. It's like, no, it does. It just, that experience that you have is different from. And so understanding those identities gives you a richness to be able to determine how this experience is for you, to then understand how that's different for others.
Can I tell a quick story?
Please.
I love telling stories,
Yeah.
and I swear I will.
Who doesn't like story time?
But this is because you were talking, and it's really interesting. Most of my life, I traveled with a Moroccan passport, and when I lived in Morocco, I would go to get a visa to go anywhere, and every time I would show up, the teller will look at me and will change their face and become a little aggressive and ask all this question. Well, why do you want to travel? And where is your family? And I want to see this. And I learned with time to play the gay card. And I would be like, I'm going to Pride, blah, blah, blah. And completely, they will change their behavior 360 degrees. Now, suddenly, I am not the terrorist in their mind or the aggressive Arab. I'm now the queer guy that lives in Morocco. I'm like, oh my God, poor you. Okay, now we can, And so I just wanted to give that example because Paul and I was playing that intersectionality and knowing also sometimes how to use it to advantage can help.
100%. You guys are awesome. I'm which one of my questions should I go into? And I'm spurring off of what you're saying, and you're nailing it. But so on that topic, one of the questions was, have any one of your identities been more appreciated or respected, while another one at the same time weaponized in the same place? So I'm curious how, that's how you used it in your personal life, but how do you navigate this, multi-marginalized experience in the workplace or out in professional settings? And what are things, employers and even just other employees can do to reduce those, systemic barriers and the harm that's done?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have come to terms with is I'm a nice, digestible queer person. Oh, someone's gonna have to edit that out of a recording because I just realized that.
Now everyone knows.
Never getting invited back. I'm the kind of queer person that I get put on the university website. I get these stories written about me because my whiteness makes me safe. My appearance, I traditionally, have to wear things that look a bit more masculine. And that makes me really easy to put in these spaces and say, we've got queer people doing this stuff, and that's wonderful. And it's sometimes been great. My career has been able to, benefit from that attention and that opportunity. But at that same time, as great as those moments are, I then walk into a classroom and I happen to mention, queerness in my intro business class. And I have a student email me saying, Thomas, I want you to keep the classroom PG. This is really inappropriate for you. We were talking about discrimination in the workplace. It was completely relevant.
Sorry.
No.
You're so great. I should just go back to the audience. Go ahead.
And so this idea that in these moments, our organizations can celebrate us and can give us opportunities, but in the exact, next minute, you walk into the next part of your organization and it's weaponized against you. Yeah. And for years afterwards, I was so cautious of any time I ever taught or did research on these topics for fear of someone thinking I was being inappropriate. And so this is a way that, my whiteness protected me and gave me that opportunity to be queer and be celebrated, but in another space, that wasn't enough, because just being queer in that context was enough for a student to then feel threatened or to use that against me. Mm-hmm. And so those are the challenges that we constantly have to face about what identities are central to us, but also what are central to others and how they then decide to use that.
Yeah. Would you like to go?
So, I was looking at the question and I was like, wow, I think I probably live these three things. I feel appreciated, and a moment you feel tokenized and you feel weaponized. And I was thinking, it's like being in a chess game. a moment I feel like I'm a pawn, and then I'm like the knight, and then I'm like the queen. And it's like depend on the situation and who you're interacting with, somehow that keeps changing. And so at every moment I interact with people, I start to notice it. And as you walk in the streets and you interact with a stranger or at the grocery store or at work, and the context, I automatically will see people either appreciate me or what I do and would talk, and their behavior will be different. And there is a moment where you feel tokenized and people want your pictures everywhere and they want to use it, and it's Pride Month, so now who doesn't want a queer person on their website or in their conversation, right? It's like we suddenly on demand, and it's like the 1 month where we're really wanted everywhere. Yeah. And then it's like that pass, and then suddenly, like we're back weaponized and back in the closet or in the drawer again until next Pride. So I think we lived that, and so it changed for me at all those moments.
I completely appreciate and identify with your, analogy of like the chessboard. And as I move through my transition, it's getting even more weird and complicated. But, every time I've been out and about, I get similar questions, it's like, oh, tell me about this or that, or what's it like to be X, Y, Z, pick anything that's, makes me an other. And I've always just been like, well, I don't know when I'm being discriminated, unless it's, very overt and you're using, foul language. I don't know if it's because I'm Black, even though I'm multiracial, but I present and I'm mostly Black. I don't know if it's because I was female and looked like a woman. I don't know if it's because I was queer. I don't know if it's because I was masculine presenting. Sometimes I didn't know if it was because I was young. I don't know if it was class. I would never know. And so it's that chess game again of okay, if I know what space I'm going into, it's okay, which identity is safe to just relax on versus which one do I maybe need to have some armor and ready to be defensive, or what's my exit strategy? And then in other ones, it's which ones do I need to highlight? Yeah. Because this is what's being appreciated, in Pride Month, right? Which ones are being highlighted right now? So it's very exhausting, though, to live every moment, every day like this. And so what's one thing you all would like to let leadership of major companies or just everyday people kind of understand? What is the reality of living with that every day in relation to the workplace? How does that impact your day-to-day, your performance, your overall well-being, and how you show up?
I can start. So, I think when I think about, leadership and organizations, I also think about systems and structures. Mm-hmm. And we live in a world that there is powerful people and there's oppressed people. And that's the reality of the world we live in. And unfortunately, for the longest time and until today, there is a subset of people that have been in power and that control most of what we do. And then there's a subset of people that have always been oppressed. Mm-hmm. And that's apply in the workplace where we work. And so I look at a boardroom or a leadership team or any teams, and I'm like, I get it that you always put your intention that you are trying to diversity and do all these things, but the reality is if I look at your boardroom and it's all white, cisgender, heterosexual men sitting there, you are enforcing that system. Yeah. You are in that powerful position and you are using that power and you're oppressing other people. And that goes in the whole organization. And so when you're a leader, I think if you look around you and that's the boardroom you're in, or that's the team you're in, then you are part of that problem. And the reality of the world today, and it's great that a lot of us can act on it. And so you have to do something about it and make sure that you're creating those diverse teams.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you said that. One of the questions I wanted to ask, but I was like, I can't ask 30 questions, was, how does having various diverse people in leadership and management roles lead to positive changes? And I think you just kind of highlight that, just having that representation, having, the different points of views, and the last talk that we just heard, having different perspectives, causes that opportunity for innovation, change, growth, right? And also is reducing all our daily stress and pressure and harm, and leads to better life and productivity, which at the end of the day, that's what companies want, is the best productivity and best in their class, right? Yeah, and so I don't know, Thomas, if you wanted to touch on that first question, or we move along.
Yeah, there's so many parts to touch on.
I know.
So I think it's so important that we are fully recognizing the forms of oppression, both individual levels, systemic levels. And so my next comment that I'm going to bring in is in by no means trying to discount that among 2S LGBTQ+ communities, that these are lived realities that we need to address. But the part that I've been doing a lot of research on lately is something called minority strengths. And this is an area that we don't talk a lot about. And it's that as individuals, whether it's around sexuality and gender identity, whether it's around race or ability, or around age or class, that being part of different groups, different lived experience, allows us to develop specific strengths and skills that we wouldn't have developed otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so I did research just asking LGBTQ+ folks across the world, what about your identity has created strength from you, or created opportunity or access? What are the positive things about being queer, essentially? Vivek Shraya wrote a great book, What I Love About Being Queer. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. And individuals around the world just wrote in and said, I never really thought about this before. No one had talked or asked me, how this identity actually made things better for me in the workplace. And from the research, we saw tangible ways that as queer people, we have the capacity, not everyone, but a large segment of the population, to be able to do a novel and unique form of perspective taking, a certain level of empathy and resilience that's built, a self-confidence. There's individuals who talk about how through this identity, they've been able to be champions in their workforce that they wouldn't have had otherwise. They're recognized by leadership where their level wouldn't have been possible. So one of the things I'd really want management and leadership teams to know is that when dealing with our communities as queer people and the intersection of our queerness with all other identities, is that it gives us these unique strengths and opportunities that can be truly beneficial to the organization, beneficial to our teams. But if we're not put into that space where systemically, we are allowed to bring that in and to leverage those, that's such a significant loss to the organization. And so I want us to keep talking about discrimination and harassment, because if we stop that, we're not going to change it. But we also need to talk about queer joy. We also need to talk about those minority strengths as a way that they can be opportunities for us to grow and have impact on each other and to our organizations.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anyways, the ADHD is really high right now. It's also the first in-person event that I've been to since the pandemic, so it's great.
I can always tell a story every time that happens.
Awesome. Well, you probably will have a story for this, but if you also have tangible tips, that's also great too. I'm curious, how can an intersectional lens be applied to both internal DEI work and efforts, as well as external facing work? Because I know we're talking about, we need to have conversations, we need to have more people included at the table, but are there any other areas in which, actual tangible progress can be made, and either things that you've dreamt of or thought of, or anything that you've seen done or have experienced?
Absolutely. I'm going to start with a story also.
No way.
So this was really, it was interesting. I was reading a lot about intersectionality, kind of trying to understand it. And I came across the research that's been done a long time ago on this topic. We only started talking about intersectionality a year or a couple of years ago, but really there've been research on it done since the 80s. And so it's really not a new concept in certain areas. And so this research was analyzing and talking about feminism, the whole movement, feminism, and a lot of, when women were like, we don't want to stay home, and we're going to progress, and we're going to start working towards equality. It was driven in majority, in the research I was talking a little bit, the stories, like it was driven by white women, right? And it was very vocal, and we wanted equality. And what was interesting is, as they talked about everything that they were feeling, being home and all this unequal treatment, there was the other side, which was black women were like, what are you talking about? Black women inherently were the ones supporting the families, working there, and they were like, I wish I was bored at home. I was actually out there working, right? And so this is one group, but two complete different experiences. And this is where sometimes the danger of our D&I strategy lie. It's because oversimplify the problem, and we say, companies say, I'm gonna focus on women. And by focusing on women, somehow we're gonna solve the D&I problem to all women in this category. But the reality is, even within that group, every person there, and even if we categorize people, come with a complete different set of experiences and challenges that what I recommend is like, don't oversimplify your strategy and the danger of just focusing on that one group and oversimplifying it.
Go ahead. I love what you're saying. Go ahead, and I have a comment after too.
Yeah. So kind of building on this in terms of what can we do internally with our D&I work, start asking the questions about, are we collecting the right type of data, and are we collecting it in the right way? And so, intersectional data to be collected is complicated. There's no doubt about that, how you analyze it and whether it's identifiable. But the fact of the matter is, when we're not collecting rich data, we're not making the problems disappear, we're just choosing to avoid knowing these problems exist. So from an EDI or D&I standpoint, we have to go back to those very fundamentals of how are we collecting our data? Are we forcing individuals to just check a box because we know that'll be a quick correlation or a ANOVA to run, or so that we can easily categorize that with a nice Excel spreadsheet? Or are we actually creating spaces where we're going to explore individuals' lived realities, giving them the chance to write things in? And yes, that adds a lot of time to HR. And so for anyone here who that would add time to, I'm sorry, but you can bill me, I will never pay it, but it is time well worth putting into it, because through that process of better data collection, that's where we have the opportunity to understand the nuance, the gray areas, the complexity. And then the external side, what we can do there, and now I'll tell a story, because I'm just jealous. Recently in Guelph, there's an organization that painted a rainbow crosswalk in their parking lot. And this has got a lot of media attention as, finally this is happening. Guelph doesn't have rainbow crosswalks. We have cow crosswalks. We don't have rainbow crosswalks. You think I kid, but we do. So this organization did this, and they consulted with the local pride organization to make this happen. But there were members of the pride community, disability advocates, who said, if you do this rainbow crosswalk, it needs to be done in a specific way, or it becomes inaccessible for people with certain disabilities to be able to cross there. It's no longer safe. And the organization and the pride committees ignored this advocacy work. And so we've got this beautiful crosswalk, but it's not necessarily going to be accessible for individuals who use service animals. It might not be accessible for individuals with certain forms of color blindness, and it creates greater danger or harm. So when we're doing external EDI work or D&I work, we need to be thinking about, who are we consulting? And when we consult someone, are we actually listening to what they tell us? Are we taking that feedback in, or did we just do that in a performative sense? And so I think that's a core area that we can't, from an intersectionality perspective, we can't just say, oh, well, we talked to people and we did this anyway. If we're going to talk to individuals, then we really need to hear and listen to what's being said and incorporate that into our actions.
Can I add quickly something around data? I work in data a lot, and I think about data, and coming in tech, we talk a lot about it. And something that it's really great when you do your internal assessment and collect the data, that it's really important you analyze and understand it. Now, here is a challenge with that data set. is inherently not going to have everyone in there because your company is not diverse. I mean, most of companies are still struggling with it. And a lot of people who fall in the intersectionality spectrum, and the more you are intersectional, you're probably not going to be showing in the data. That's one of the challenges we also have in general within the LGBTQ2S communities and collection data, is that the more we go, there is less data about Black women, there is less data about Indigenous people, there is less data about people with disabilities. And so what you need to ask yourself once you have that data set is, what is the data that you're missing? Because what's going to happen with your strategy is you're going to try and build it for the data set you have, and you're going to forget about the people that you don't have. And so this is also a problem that goes creating programs, funding, opportunities. These people just never make it to the boardroom and to the table.
So much richness. I'm like taking all my mental notes, and I'm like, more. I absolutely agree, and I think, I guess one of my central takeaways from what you're both saying that was flagged for me was, even if you're consulting, the people you're trying to address, which I do think is one of the first things anyone can employ or deploy, is also who is asking the questions, right? Because if I answer them honestly, am I gonna be, is there a repercussion for me telling you about yourself? Like, yes, I'll say it respectfully, but if I say, well, you guys you're racist, or you're homophobic, and these are the examples, these are the things I've experienced, is my job on the line? Is my promotion? Is even just my safety? You know what I mean? And so what can people put in place to create, a system that makes it safe to even share that information to get better, rich data? And exactly, I was also thinking, because of that, what about all the people who choose not to participate or just put in the answers that they think are safe enough, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's something that keeps coming back to me every time you're all sharing is, I think it's really merging, yes, the research, but also like what we were learning in the last talk of like, it's really at the end of the day, corporations are people, right? We're all here are corporations, but like, I'm not seeing a building, I'm seeing people, right? And so it's like, what can we do as individuals to learn how to find our own biases or expectations, and what that, violating our expectation, like, what does that mean for us, and how can we minimize that and test, is this a valid response? Because sometimes it is. Our fear, indicators are there for a reason, our instincts are there for a reason, but more times than not, it's nonsense, right? And I think the more individuals are able to learn that and practice that, we'll be able to create better data, research and systems that allow for more collaboration. So I just wanted to add that. One other question, because I think time is ending and we probably want to do some Q&A. Yeah? Excellent. Is 2. Where would you recommend people find additional information on this topic? How can people keep the conversation going? And then also, what is one key takeaway that you want everyone to leave with? Whoever feels inspired.
I can start. Well, this is where I do my shameless plug-in. Go to QueerTech.org. I'm just kidding. No, actually, so one of the resources we do, and people who are curious, we do a lot of interviews with different queer people from different backgrounds to tell their stories, right? We really believe that we don't hear enough stories of other peoples from other communities. And I think for myself, and I think for everyone here, it's one great way to educate yourself, is really just listening to other stories, because we learn so much about other people's experiences, and I think it makes us realize the privilege we have and the disadvantages we have in society. So if you want to listen to videos, that's a great way. There is a lot of other organizations that do amazing work. I mean, CCGCL I also have. Pride at Work also is a great organization that you can check out their resources. And Google. Honestly, there is just so much out there. If you just type intersectionality, the amount of research and document you'll find is there. So it's really just up to people looking for information.
I'd also really, add that social media is a great place for this information. You know, I use Twitter almost exclusively to follow other individuals who are, you know, sharing their insights about this. And what I love about using social media is that it gives you the opportunity to diversify the voices you're listening from. Because, you know, and I am as guilty as many individuals about this, you know, when I first joined social media, I was following a lot of white queer voices. And I took stock of that and said, darn, that is, like, if I'm only hearing this one viewpoint, I'm not understanding the story. And so I make an intentional choice. Who am I following? Who am I not? So, you know, there are incredible, like, most of the conversations around intersectionality in business are from queer women of color who are leading the conversations and the initiatives. Thinking of Dr. Monica Cox, thinking about Dr. Enrica Ruggs, you know, these are individuals who will tweet and share information, you know, through social media as a way to make it accessible to others. And so using that method that we're all, you know, half of us right now are probably scrolling through Twitter, you know, using that as a chance to say, maybe I need to follow some people who have different identities from my own to ensure that I'm exposed to different understandings and different ideas. And so I think that's something really core and simple that's part of most everyday experience that can help going forward.
Honestly, I don't use Twitter, but as you said that, I'm like, they're so right. Like, yeah, I could just follow people that are of different voices. I don't have to tweet anything. I could just take it in instead of, you know, only on Instagram. So I love that, you know, very practical tips and resources. So thank you, and totally please, if there are questions, or it's more story time, so. Is there a mic? Or you could try to project, either way.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this talk. I'm like super excited to hear these thoughts. My name is Javier, by the way. I was thinking that the social media feed is a great example for how unconscious bias works, because you only see your feed. You don't know what you're missing. But my comment is more related to the opportunities we have to use a situation to sort of like educate the system. And I know it's not our responsibility, but I'm thinking of those times when your intersectionality is used against you. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, you know, I'm Mexican and gay, and sometimes I don't look Mexican and gay, and people say, oh, but you don't look Mexican. It's like, well, how does a Mexican supposed to look? And or you don't look gay. It's like, well, you know, I forgot my purse. So my question is, can you comment on that? Do you have any stories? I'm sure you have. How can we use those opportunities to kind of push the envelope?
Oh my God, I love this question. It makes me remember just like all the stories and the situations I've been in. And one that always made me laugh was when I lived in New York City and I would travel in the US. You know, I'm a visible Arab, so, you know, I would engage with people and do great. And then, you know, I would mention something about being queer, and then they'll be like, but you're Arab and Muslim. I'm like, well, surprise, there are queer people in the Arab world and the Muslim world. And so you realize, and you know, sometimes we would have those conversations, and it's like, well, there are people exist there, but they are being silenced, and people are scared for their life, and that's why you don't hear the stories. Mm-hmm. That's why people are not visible. And there's opportunities where you take that to educate people that, you know, what you see is not always what you get.
Mm-hmm. For sure. There's a couple other questions.
Hello, my name is Aaron. Great job on rocking the dress, by the way.
Thank you.
There. I want to ask a question about privilege here, because whenever we talk about privilege, it almost feels like we're implying something negative there. How can we start having conversations about privilege coming from a place of acknowledgements instead of accusations?
I think that's an excellent question.
Does everyone free for the rest of the evening? Because we got a lot to say about it.
I think, so one of the pieces that I was taught really early on as I was doing this work was, you know, and I'll talk about it from the opposite side of privilege, from oppression, and that we have to be careful of engaging in the oppression Olympics. And I think we have to also be careful of the privilege Olympics. And so I usually start because, Guelph is the whitest city I think I know in Ontario. And so I get the most reactance whenever I talk about privilege in the classroom. And so instead of going from a place of, well, privilege, makes you better off than someone else or better than someone else, I say privilege makes it different than someone else. So privilege isn't about that you are inherently having an easy life. It's that this element isn't, making it harder. And so what I found with a lot of students in particular was that just by using those different languages, using different words within our language has an ability to change the nature of how individuals are willing to engage and listen to it, which makes them much more open to, it's not suddenly, I'm a bad person, it's, oh, I have more to learn, I have more to question about this. So that's one tangible thing that's worked in my case, but I'm sure there's some other examples.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for sure, changing your language should just explain in that same way that it doesn't mean your life isn't hard if it's hard, because everyone's life is hard at some point. It just means it's hard in a different way, and there are barriers or there aren't barriers. So don't make it worse and discriminate on other people who don't have that same opportunity and privileges as yourself, but also teaching people how to use their privileges. Even folks who are discriminated against, we all do have some form of privilege in some context throughout our life. And so I think it's being aware of that and using it as much as possible, and then, helping other people who have different privileges than you do the same. That's kind of my takeaway.
It brings us to the first question, definition of intersectionality, right? And we did a full circle, but the reality is everyone comes with privilege and it does disadvantage. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they're compounded, but we all carry them. You're white, black, indigenous, queer, we're in hexagon and we carry all those parts, and people forget, when you talk about privilege, they forget all those things and they just think, I lived this negative experience, and it's like, yeah, that's the disadvantage you had as a person, and yeah.
Totally.
I think
We're getting shoot off.
Paige is like, it's
okay.
time.
Story time is over.
The timer does say 0.
One more question.
Okay. Sure. I see
One
a
more.
half a hand.
Yes, I'll try to keep it short. So I really like that this conversation is happening outside of academia. Like it was mentioned, it's been there for a while, but even at my own company, I see us starting to talk about intersectionality, which is great, but it's still very surface level, and it's quite shallow. When we talk about it, it's still very much, who here has pets? Who here is, what order of birth are you in? Just starting to identify the differences that we have, but they're still not necessarily talking about the true meaning of intersectionality, which has to do with discrimination and disadvantages. So how do we get there? How do we dig a little deeper in a workplace setting where we don't want to make others uncomfortable necessarily, but we do want to acknowledge intersectionality?
I'm just gonna take it. I think that's an excellent question, and like the whole point of this, right? I think it's not done without being uncomfortable. Like you just have to be brave enough to push those buttons and, ruffle some feathers and get uncomfortable. But also, if you're in the position of power, you also have to be ready for it and be open and just know, like, all right, sometimes we're gonna have conversations that I'm not gonna like what I hear. And doing that work of like, is this just my like internal physiological response because it's different or new and I feel threatened? Okay, I feel threatened, like, is this a real threat? No, why? And like do that inner work, right? But doing it collectively as well. I think that's really the first thing, is just don't expect that it's not gonna be uncomfortable. And then working together to find the ways to have more of those voices come up and find your allies, right? Like there's always people in different organizations and different groups where they're able to use their power to help other people's voices be heard, or come up with different solutions, or call out someone who's being discriminatory, even if they don't mean to be. It's like, hey, actually that was not the right thing to say, like this is why, here's something else instead. And so I really do believe that it doesn't have to be as hard as it seems, if we just start learning how to check ourselves and find very simple logical solutions, like answers. Like I misgendered you once on here by accident, but luckily you used he and they, and I was like, I'm going back to like folks and them and like not guys, because that might be uncomfortable for the moment. It's like, I found that in myself, right? Like, so it's just like, you have to be open and aware to it, in my opinion. And sorry for taking over, but I was very much passionate, I was called to it.
No, that was great. I was gonna say, you're not gonna be able to have the conversation without creating discomfort. But I think you need to set the stage for the conversation. It's very important that you create a safe space for everyone. Remember that the challenge is that every single person also carry their trauma, they carry generational trauma, and this conversation makes it hard because it comes from deep down. And so it's very important that you set that stage and have and create this and say, you might feel this way, and these are things that's gonna happen, and this is the system that we set for you to have these. And companies who really want to have that, they even have therapists on stage for after this conversation for people to go and talk to them, because they are very hard, but it also brings these people together, and you see these companies and teams performing because of this conversation. So there is a way to do it.
Before we get a real boot, thank you.
Thank you.
I wasn't showing them off stage, just to clarify. But I did want to say thank you to Jaymin, Naoufel, and Thomas. I am enthralled by each and every one of you. And I'm so thankful that you are here to chat about understanding intersectionality, for being so open with us, and for reminding us that there's space for queer joy too. So thank you very much, and we'll chat out.
To introduce our next speaker, please welcome Jessica Grey, Associate Director, Global Procurement Strategy and Supplier Inclusion at RBC, our sponsor for this next season.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really short, so let me just arrange. I'm happy to be short. So I'm completely illuminated. I don't know about all of you, but the speakers have been amazing. The panels have been amazing. And I feel a light shining on me. Yes, the light's coming out of the sky and in the room. So the next speakers are probably perfect for this conference, which is about illumination and shining light. As you know, my name is Jessica Grey. I'm the Associate Director of RBC Global Procurement, Supplier Diversity and Inclusion Strategies and Programs. It's my pleasure to be here today introducing the next speakers. At the same time, I'm going to go back to our PhDs, and I'm going to set the expectation with you all now that after you've listened to these speakers, you will be Googling them and wanting to buy every coffee table on their site like me. So good luck, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first Unstoppable speakers at the summit today. George Yabu and Glenn Pushelberg, founders of Yabu Pushelberg Design Studios. Glenn Pushelberg, founders of Yabu Pushelberg Design Studios in 1980. Since then, they've become a globally recognized interior design firm with offices in Toronto and New York. They have been inducted into the Interior Designers Hall of Fame, named one of the world's most influential design companies, and named officers of the Order of Canada in 2014. Without further ado, enjoy the rest of the conference, and over to you, George and Glenn.
Tell me, George, about the most exciting project that you have worked on over the years.
That's that's a difficult thing. Often I'll ask you what's the most exciting thing you're working on. One is exactly what I'm working on now, but it's also what's exciting is what I'm going to be working on next. So I'm not a person that I appreciate where we come from, where we are, but nothing's linear. So it's hard for me to, honestly, Lauren, it's hard for me to answer that. And the other question that is often asked us, you may not be even wanting to ask us, what turned your career around? You know what? I don't really know.
But I would give a few clues. Like we finished La Samaritan, which is a kind of famed department store in Paris last year. We're working on the conversion of the U.S. Embassy in London into a Rosewood Hotel. We're doing a safari retreat in Kruger Park and in South Africa. We're doing the interiors of the tallest building in Tokyo. We're building a onsen near the base of Mount Fuji. We're doing another little resort in Bali, another one in Phuket. So we have a few nice projects on Earth.
I mean, to those of us who are not in the design world, all of those would qualify as exciting. They sound pretty amazing to me, and certainly amazing places to visit after. So, I mean, maybe I'll narrow the question down a little bit. So is there a project in any of those destinations or other ones that you haven't mentioned that force you to change how you would normally approach a project because of the destination? Just talking globally, because some of our attendees here are looking to develop their business globally. Have you had to change your approach in how you do business in Canada versus one of these destinations?
I think there's I think that, these are always generalizations when you talk about attributes of people who live in countries. But I think as Canadians, generally, we tend to be a little bit better listeners and more empathetic to different cultures because we are this multicultural place. And I think it's super important to understand the nuances of different places and how they conduct business. I think it's important not to change who you are and what you're providing, but to have an understanding that there are different ways of doing business. There are different ways of politeness that in some of the kind of deeper cultures, relationship building is much more important than transactional work. Like in America, it's all much of it's transactional. Of course, people want to like you and know you, but we're going to, Vietnam next week to meet a new client, and it's 2 days of living with him, understanding the history of the region, a day working on the project, and another day having dinner with him and talking about the results, what we learned before we actually start the project. To us, it's the most, for that type of client, it's invaluable for him and for us. And I think that if you're conducting business in different parts of the world, you just need to have the openness of understanding that it can't be just a transactional enterprise. This tends to be in North America.
We tend to think, naively or not, or ballsy enough to think that the rest of the world should work and conduct business at a certain standard, at a certain status quo, and it aligns with us. But we learned fast working in these 19 countries, you can't expect that. There's deep cultural heritage in there, ingrained in there. And we all want respect, right? And that goes in business and outside of business. So there's a parallel there. It's a learning thing that it took us a while to figure out. And the outcome is, after 40 years of doing this, we become far more empathetic in the way we want to build a culture in a studio, not just to create and do and design and get involved in great global projects, but to build a culture, this empathetic culture. A friend of ours said, you guys do mighty fine work, and a lot of it. And there's nothing that you can't do. But your legacy should be the people that you've collected, that have drawn, that you've mentored, and
you've shown a different way of
and that's being your true legacy. When I'm kind of thinking about it,
How,
maybe it's true.
I want to go back to that other point too for a second, George.
Sure.
The thing that happens is that we all fall into this kind of biases. Well, in China, the business is more ruthless. In this country, it's more of this. And Russians, they're cutthroat. Or these generalizations are patently untrue. And what happens is I've seen this even with senior staff people. They get into these notions, and it's like every client is different. And yes, there are more ruthless people and there are fair people and people respectful. But if you build on relationships, you understand the differences, and you don't fall into the kind of typical bias traps that, people in the Middle East are like this, or people in Europe are like that, or Americans are like this versus Canadians and stuff. This shedding of biases, whether we're talking about gender or whether we're talking about culture, are artificial, and it's so simple to get into those traps. And if you're working internationally, to us, people will talk about, oh yes, you got a project in Paris, and then you might have a project in a kind of seemingly not so much fun country like Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. But at the end of the day, you can have more joy working in Jeddah if you have a wonderful client that is respectful and caring, and you can have a ruthless client in the most exotic place. So it's really the people building and the relationships, and through empathy, having a level of understanding without biases that you can actually grow.
And how has being a member of the LGBT plus community, has that affected those relationships at all, for the better or for the worse? How have you managed that over your years of doing business globally?
I don't see that distinction coming out, really. I don't know why. Is it the type of client that we're working with these days? I'm not sure. Is it the mood in society right now a bit more open? I'll tell you one thing. We were asked to submit a proposal for a private club in New York for this community that we're talking about. And
the gay and lesbian transgender community.
Interesting, because
social club.
When you pitch them, they all want the same things. And that we're doing another private club right now for some SUSA members of a particular credit card company, and the wants, the desires, feeling of belonging are no different. It's really interesting, really interesting.
I think maybe, this is maybe an assumption, but I think maybe growing up being a gay lesbian, a gay person, that if you're on the outside, you kind of naturally work from your intuition, your empathy to try to figure your way through things. Whereas if you're socially constructed like a straight person, you're more rigid in terms of how you deal with people. I think there is an advantage to that. Because I need to understand this person first to see where their latitude is, or maybe and it's not about this your relationship based on your sexuality, because they don't really care, they're in business. But it's like, how do I relate to this person and in an empathetic way, because I have built that into my system as a gay from going through my experiences through my youth. So
it's giving you an edge in business.
I think that this is a theory, but I think that could be true. We were in the 70s, it took us a little time to come out of the closet, but we really didn't get a lot of overt issues from people in business.
Jumping out, it was just the door was left slightly ajar, and then we just walked out. Yeah. But I want to go back to my point about, bearing in mind we're in New York City, it's much more global and international.
Much more open.
But that process of bidding for a project, what I loved about it and I didn't love about it was the criteria is all the same. We weren't treating the criteria of problem solving any differently. Yeah. They wanted a problem to solve. This is what we want. This is for our people, for networking. And same with the other financial institution has a card membership. That's what I loved about it, was same. But at the same time, because we're dinosaurs, there was some little bit of underdog.
You're too.
And I'm going back. It's like, but what my point is, before you try to modify my comment plan, is that we're here to push. I think we're here to push possibilities for anybody, and nobody should be held back, and therefore the dullness or the mallification of a big metropolis like New York City, we still have to fight the fight to really stand out, and that's what we're still doing
as designers.
Yeah,
I think that
to make a change, and to be heard.
Does that motivate you? Is that an exciting feeling?
Oh,
always.
The challenges of
I love convincing people otherwise, or when they say on clients says you can't do that. I'm going, oh yeah,
So you couldn't answer, George, what your most exciting was, but could you answer what your biggest triumph was? Was there one thing that you're like, oh, I took that that project from here to there, and I triumphed.
Bergdorf's making, like, corralling a bunch of crazy fashion people at the high end in New York City and having to corral them together and get rid of their egos on the table and say, well, why are we making a department store you can get shit and the shit anywhere? And that was my biggest, to me, it's like, oh my God, we're actually working in New York when we weren't living there yet. We have to go every week, first flight out, first flight in, save money. But here we are, and I can't believe it. And they gave us an office, our office for a temporary set office, looked over Central Park. I thought, this is really us. I thought we're going to do, our friend's wealthy aunt's powder room over, wallpaper or something. Never did I thought I'd be in this position. But what was my point? I guess that was something that said, wow, I think there's something that people want from us. And that was exciting, more so than we want to do something for them. Somebody wanted us, not a Sally Field moment. Oh, we really love
Sally Field moment.
But, that was interesting. I remember that. Now that you asked.
Yeah, I think any prejudices around sexuality for us have really actually come internally, which is surprising, more internally than anything else. I think, we have an organization of about 125, 130 people in New York and Toronto. And we're very open, yellow, green, black, white, blue, orange, it doesn't matter. It makes us, actually, we prefer to have this kind of open environment that people feel comfortable to express themselves. And people come out of their closet, people switch from being a straight person to this person to whatever. And we're happy for them. Going back to sewing up what George was saying about being fearless. Of course, we're fearless in business because our philosophy is you start from honing your craft. You make your craft better and better, better all the time. The money comes as a result of that. If you focus on the money, it never comes. So it makes you more fearless because all of a sudden a situation doesn't work with a client or something that you're forbidden to make something better. So when we had no money, we said, we're out. When we have money, it might be a little bit easier, but we said we're out. But even with this COVID thing, we ended up with a few bad clients that we probably shouldn't have taken, and we lost a ton of money. But you know what? We have self-respect, and we have our extended family of designers, and there's much more respect and trust there, which you build, and you'll always find another client. And I think that part of that is that kind of fearlessness is built from having the opportunity to develop your own values and moral systems that you're not based on something that the general society is telling you. You have to make decisions to care and look after yourself, and you can amplify those decisions if you're ambitious and if you want to be ambitious and you want to create something. We're not suggesting it's for everybody, but for us, it works for us.
Gentlemen, I am loath to say that we are out of time, but I love ending on that last piece of advice because I wanted you to leave a word of wisdom for particularly our new LGBT plus entrepreneurs. So I think that's a great one to go with. So George Yabu, Glenn Pushelberg, thank you both so much for joining us. We appreciate you telling us a little bit about your story. And thank you so much for joining us at the summit this year.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank
you. Bye now. Bye, everyone.
Please welcome AJ Stewart, Manager, Membership and Supplier Diversity, Canada's LGBT+ Chamber of Commerce, who will introduce our next session, sponsored by Air Canada.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our 2022 LGBT+ Global Business Summit. Air Canada is the proud sponsor of this summit and for this next session. Air Canada believes in CGLCC's mission in creating a thriving and inclusive Canadian economy. It also values diversity and inclusivity within its workforce, but also in our society. Air Canada has a long-standing history of supporting the LGBTQ2+ community and was the first major Canadian airline to protect LGBTQ2+ team members by including gender identity and sexual orientation in workplace and non-discrimination policy. From hiring practices to community support, that's one of the many reasons that they've been named for 6 years in a row now one of Canada's top diversity employers. Yesterday, to mark the beginning of Pride Month and to celebrate the show and show its commitment to the LGBTQ2+ community, Air Canada raised the Progress flag at its headquarters in Montreal, as well as at sites in Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. It will also be present in 7 Prides across Canada this summer. It's now my pleasure to introduce the final session of the day, Boldly Go, Changing to Create a Better Future in the Workplace, with Blue Del Barrio and Emily Coutts from Star Trek Discovery. Thank you so much for being here today, and as a diehard fan and advocate for Star Trek's message, I am honored to be introducing this session. We're going to start with a short teaser on screen, just up here, and I guess there's only one thing left to say, and that's let's fly. Thank you so much.
Life is just a blink. It is one heartbeat in the entire lifespan of the universe.
Captain? Captain? Are you with us?
Today, we seek to understand a threat like none our galaxy has faced before.
What exactly is this anomaly?
We're not certain. Our ship was hit by something.
Together, we will meet this threat to our shared galaxy.
Until we understand the anomaly well enough to predict its path, billions more lives will be at risk.
Not on our watch.
Leadership is about balance.
Your acts of bravery
Are huge swings of the pendulum. And there is a very fine line between a pendulum and a wrecking ball.
It'll be bumpy. We could be destroyed. We're totally going to ignore that warning, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Oh well, I've lived a good life. Jump. With so much at stake, countless lives, futures. Once we enter the anomaly, we are going where no one has gone before. Wherever we come from, whatever our experiences,
You got this.
we're all in this together.
I gotta have hope that we'll find a way to stop it.
We cannot let fear define us in this moment. The future remains uncertain, but the captain in me knows anything is possible.
Ready when you are, Captain.
Let's fly.
They can say what they want now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the lovely introduction. We are both so excited to be here in person at the 2022 CGLCC Summit. Happy Pride Month to everybody. My name is Emily Coutts, she, her pronouns.
And my name is Blue Del Barrio, they, them, or he, him. We are both cast members on Star Trek Discovery on Paramount+. Star Trek has always been ahead of its time in terms of diversity on screen. Most notably, Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura, was one of the first women of color in a lead role on a television series, and ended up sharing one of the first interracial kisses on screen. The show also starred a Japanese character, Sulu, played by George Takei. Takei later came out as gay, and this became canon for his character in the reboot movie Star Trek Beyond.
Gene Roddenberry believed in an idea he termed IDIC, which is infinite diversity and infinite combinations. I was recently asked in an interview what this means to me, and I wrote this in response. If you shared a piece of yourself with me, a piece of your magic, and I kept it in my heart, then I shared a piece of my magic with someone else, they would experience both a piece of me and a piece of you. Through sharing our experiences, opening up to others, letting people in, and celebrating our differences, we can learn true human compassion and connection. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations means infinite connection, infinite celebration, and infinite love. It is truly hard to pinpoint any other franchise that has so fundamentally impacted our society. So flash forward 50 years to our show, Star Trek Discovery, the first television reboot since Enterprise in 2005. I got a call one day from my agent, and I was on vacation overseas, and she said, "You booked Star Trek." To which I replied, "I auditioned for Star Trek." Because the show was so under wraps at the time, I had auditioned for it unknowingly under a code name, which seemed very cool. And I hadn't ever watched Star Trek in my entire life. So I believe I also said, "Is that the one with that Spock guy?" To which my agent said, "Go do your homework." So obviously I had a lot of watching and learning to do. I started watching the original series. My vacation was Coutts. I just sat in my hotel room and started watching Trek for the rest of my time. And I started to understand a little bit of the magic that was Star Trek. It wasn't until I went to my first convention, though, really, when I started to meet fans and understood what the franchise really was meaning to people. It gave everyone a voice. Everyone believed in something greater, a utopia of sorts where everyone could belong. So we shot the first season and continued to push the boundaries of diversity. We had a black female lead, 2 out gay characters that shared on-screen kisses, a gay showrunner, diverse directors. I mean, what more could we do?
Oh no. During my last year of college, I auditioned for a character named Adira. And a couple of weeks after I graduated, I was flying out to Toronto to start filming on my first TV show. Adira is the first canon non-binary character on Star Trek. My good friend Ian Alexander plays Adira's boyfriend Gray, who is the first transmasculine character on Star Trek. As incredible as this was, and as lucky as I felt to have been cast, this process was not an easy one for me. Because when I auditioned for this role, I was still figuring out who I was. I wasn't openly out as transgender to my family and to many of my friends. So to be slowly coming out while I was filming on this hugely recognized show, to know that once my casting was announced, I would be out not just to my family and friends, but to the world, was terrifying. But as soon as I started working here, I was met with support from the entire cast and the creative team. Because our cast is already so diverse, I had immediate allies in my queer co-workers, and through our producers checking in with me, our show getting GLAAD's feedback on the scripts, and being allowed to look over the script and make suggestions on what felt right or wrong, I was given the ability to tell Adira's story in a way that felt authentic to me, creating a character that in some way tells my story.
I also had my coming out while working on Star Trek. It was between season 2 and 3, and I had started to tell my family and friends and was finally ready to share with my cast and crew. I remember one moment in particular when I realized that it was finally time to share my truth. I will note that this story has a major, major spoiler, the end of season 2, so plug your ears if you wish to avoid it. We were at a scene where our captain is deciding to leap to the future and says that she'll do it alone. And one by one, our characters go up and say, "We'll join you," because that's what Starfleet does. They stick together in even the scariest times. And I went back out to my car and I started crying, and I reflected upon my own moment where I felt like I was leaping into the future and leaping into my full self. And I thought, wow, I'm so scared. I'm so scared of what my future could hold. I'm so afraid of what I'll lose, but I have to do it now and I can't wait any longer. So I was very, very, very blessed to be able to come out to our showrunners and to our cast and crew with such loving arms. Coming out in general is just strange, and it can be very intimidating, especially with people that you're closest to. It can be a very emotional experience for both sides. So I was just very lucky to be surrounded by other out people in our cast and crew that made it feel like a safe space to do so. But I realized that some people at work are not that lucky, and it can be a much more stressful conversation to have, especially with people that are your coworkers.
Diversity on screen is incredibly important, as is having LGBTQ+ employees and patrons that feel safe in your establishments. But what does it mean to create a safe environment?
Because we were adding trans characters and trans storylines, we had to make sure that we were finding the time to support our trans cast and crew and educate everyone on how we could best support them. Our production, luckily, did not take this responsibility lightly and continues to try to make our set as safe and supportive as possible.
As I mentioned before, I felt very welcomed when I started working on Discovery, but pretty soon after, some problems started occurring on set that needed to be addressed. For a lot of our cast and crew, this was the first time working with trans actors and telling trans stories. I made my pronouns clear when I started working there, and Adira, my character, also uses they, them pronouns, but I was getting misgendered quite a lot every time I went to work, as was Ian. I would correct someone when they made a mistake, but this continued for some time. I feel like I need to use this time as an opportunity to share what being misgendered feels like. Many cisgendered people often do not know the actual harm that misgendering and dead naming, calling someone a name they no longer use, inflicts. It's not a choice to be transgender, and it's not a choice to feel this way. To speak from personal experience, when I tell someone that I'm trans and I share them with them my pronouns, I am telling them who I am, the same way anybody would introduce themselves to a new friend or a coworker. If I'm then being misgendered by this person, it feels a little bit like a punch in the gut. It feels as though I am being talked at rather than talked to. I feel unheard, unseen, and personally, I sometimes feel physically ill. Not every trans person reacts the same way, of course, but in no case is it good. Because this was happening and affecting my work, I decided to talk to the production about what we could do. They heard both Ian and me and decided to bring in a speaker from GLAAD on transgender education to come and do a seminar. There was also a time at the end of the seminar for questions to be asked and an option for anonymous questions to be sent to the speaker. There can be a lot of fear surrounding asking or saying the wrong thing as an ally, so I felt having the opportunity to submit anonymously was really beneficial. The downside of there being so much fear about messing up is that we as trans people sometimes just get completely ignored. People will avoid us so that they don't misstep, which is just as alienating as being misgendered. Overall, having these seminars and being able to speak at them and explain the situation from my perspective and opening the conversation between us and our whole production was extremely necessary. Without this, I don't know how I would have been able to continue to do my job. I was starting to dissociate all day, every time I went to work, which is a mental disorder and is sort of a break in how your mind handles new information. You can feel disconnected from your thoughts, your surroundings, feelings, and memories. It had gotten to the point where I was dissociating so heavily at work to avoid feeling the weight of being constantly misgendered that I couldn't focus on anything. This is why it's so important for action to be taken early and for these issues to be taken seriously. Because of these seminars, people began to really listen and hear us. Some more members of our crew became comfortable enough to share that they also use gender-neutral pronouns, and our set started becoming a more inclusive, healthy, and overall safe place.
As Blue said, misgendering is something that can happen, and I know for me, I feel absolutely terrible when I make a mistake, but it's also how we learn. We can either choose to pull back in fear of embarrassing ourselves, or we can just make a mistake, educate ourselves, and put the effort in. So I know for me, sitting in on these seminars that were provided by production, hearing more about the transitioning experience, hearing from Blue and Ian about how they were feeling were all incredibly beneficial to me as a friend and a coworker. I think when you have queer employees or patrons, having ready and available information and educational resources is an absolute necessity. Our production did not just do one seminar and think that all was well, though. They now have a mandatory gender awareness talk at the beginning of each season. It takes constant care and attention for everyone to feel supported and respected at work. Talking to any boss can also be a very intimidating experience, especially when it comes to personal things like transitioning or coming out. Having an open line of communication between management and employees is essential, and what ultimately allowed Blue and I to feel safe and supported talking to our higher-ups. What people in hiring positions need to understand that hiring the LGBTQ+ employees is the very first step. Creating and constantly working towards a safe and inclusive workplace is the next and equally important step. It's a step that requires effort, education, and constant action, active daily decisions that need to be made.
Being LGBTQ+ in this world can be terrifying. Many never get to be open about who they are. The Trevor Project estimates that more than 1.8 million LGBTQ+ youth between the ages of 13 to 24 seriously consider suicide each year just in the US, and at least one attempts suicide every 45 seconds. With all the recent anti-trans and anti-gay legislation in the US, it feels like we're slipping backwards at times. Allyship in this moment cannot be passive. It needs to be a constant and active choice. Because these issues may seem bigger than your workplace, bigger than the way you talk and interact with your coworkers, your bosses, your employees, and your peers, but they aren't. These are the spaces where change needs to happen, where change can be life-saving, and where change will usher in a brighter and safer world for the queer youth growing up into it.
We both feel very fortunate to work on a show that has such a legacy of inclusion and be able to be a part of the conversation around inclusion and diversity on screen. So we just wanted to thank everyone who organized this event at the CGLCC, and thank you for all of you for showing up and giving us your time. And I truly believe it takes these types of events, showing up, coming out, listening to each other, making new relationships. It's through these types of things and these discussions that we can learn more, we can come together, and we can go make the world a more loving and inclusive place. We wanted to take a few minutes, just I think we have 7 minutes and 22 seconds exactly, to do a Q&A of anything that popped up for anyone, or just general questions you may have. Oh yeah, perfect. Oh. Is this on? Yes, okay. Hey. Yes. Yes. Yes, and truly, like, the funniest, driest person. You cannot, like, yeah, you can't not laugh when you're around her. She's in Toronto this time next year at the Danforth. Oh yeah, I heard. Yes, exciting. Big Tignataro fans.
One question I had, I can project. I'm in communications. One thing I noticed in I binged the whole thing, and one thing I noticed is that Star Trek tends to use, or at least I've seen, the use of the trill as a way to, or the trill species, as a way to introduce challenging concepts that may be challenging to the public. I guess I wanted to know your stance. Do you think that being a trope, or essentially that's how the first lesbian kiss was shown on The Next Generation, for example. It was a trill versus a trill with a human, as far as I remember. So I guess my question is that overly familiar? Is that constantly being used as a way to sort of, oh, okay, now we're going to talk about a challenging thing that might be challenging to human beings, so we're going to use this as a, does that make sense? Make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. Okay. I think that, yeah, I definitely hear you. There's also a huge, from the queer fans of this show, that part of the fandom got really attached to Trill as well, for I think a lot of different reasons. Of course, they are, it's a magical existence in this universe, and they don't function like we function, but they're, the Trill within their society, they've worked everything out. There is no, there's peace, there's understanding, there's communication, and everything flows really well. I think, yeah, exactly. It's definitely, yeah, more of an ideal. And I think that there's something really touching about it, because I do think that Trek began to tell stories through Trill, but also the fans continued that. There is something about the Trill experience that probably stuck out to queer individuals, and that kind of just got piggybacked on. Yeah, I think.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you for talking about the harms of misgendering and dead naming. And it was great to hear that the studio brought in, an organization who was able to do workshops Do you have advice for smaller organizations who perhaps don't have the budget to do that so they can educate themselves?
Yeah, 100%. Something else that I wanted to do for our cast and crew, which I think I'll probably do this season, that we talked about at one of the seminars, is a list of activists that put their work out for free on social media, and there are a lot of them that are completely easily accessible. It just takes following them on whatever platform they use, whether it's YouTube or Instagram. But these are LGBTQ plus people, these are trans people, gender queer, gender fluid, gay people who are using their time and their resources to share this education, to talk about their experience, and putting it online for people to learn, simply for that, and it's completely free. That is always the resources that I give people, because it's the easiest, and it's actually probably the best, because it is coming from actual queer human beings.
Hi. Love the show. Love the uniforms. First question, fun question.
Very uncomfortable.
Oh no. I was gonna ask, do you get a copy? Do you keep your uniform? Do they let you keep the uniform? They say no?
No.
They don't even, we can't even keep our jackets on when we sit down, so they don't get creased.
Okay, so second question, more serious. Uniforms are great, but then uniforms do not allow you to be who you are. So on the show, how do you get to express who you are better without using clothing, because you can't?
Never been asked that before, which is a really great question. Do you want to talk about a little bit about what we had?
Yeah, there was a part of our, we were going to touch on this actually regarding, what's it called? Like,
you know, like actors, we're put in things that we don't choose, and you know, our character chose them for us. And I think especially for like queer people and people at any stage of transitioning, it can be kind of it can be a thing that's the power is taken away, and people are telling you what to wear and how to dress. So I think finding our own identity within our clothing that we're assigned is so important. And I know for me, the uniform is part of what makes us all so unique, because we are dedicated to this greater cause, which is Starfleet, and it's through our personalities that we get to carve out our spot on the team. Plus I have a side shave, so that helps with the, you know, personality thing, but I also didn't choose that, right? So it's you kind of have to like personalize the inside so that you feel individualistic, I suppose. But our characters are also a part of a regimented society that we signed up for, so I think wearing a uniform is a part of life.
Yeah, and we were going to draw between that and dress codes, which is the word that I forgot how to use.
Yes.
But yeah, obviously it's actors have their own thing and there's no control over it. But yeah, most people have dress codes at work, and sometimes there aren't a lot of neutral options for people to wear. It's sometimes just a very mask option, a very femme option, and that can be really difficult. Ian did go to our costume people and talk about ideas for his costume. I've also talked to our costume team about ways that I can feel more comfortable. I think that should be able to happen in any workplace, as much as there should already be sort of a range of options for things for people to wear, because it's what you're spending most of your time in. But yeah, you should be able to have open communication with your bosses or whoever you're working for on your dress code in your workspace.
The clock says 0, but there might be one more question.
Sorry, CGLCC holding it down with the questions here. So Star Trek at its heart has always been a platform for diversity, inclusion, ideology. Having researched the show yourselves and knowing the show intimately, do you see a shift in how Star Trek Discovery or New Trek is addressing new issues as opposed to, say, TNG or the original series? Has there been a shift in how these issues are addressed for a new generation?
I mean, of course the stories are different, but I think that the way that, like we set things on Trill, we set things into Trek, and it's at an arm's distance, and it's in a magical world, so we can almost, it's like more palatable to talk about huge things. Like there's so many themes of climate change and politics in religion in our show, huge themes about family and inclusion, and all these things that, because we set it in this hyper fantasy world, people can like slowly pull out what they need to reflect upon. But I think that the way we do it is very similar. Actually, it's passed down. It's evolved obviously hugely in terms of production and our ability to tell greater stories. But yeah, do you have anything?
No, I agree. I think it's again, like, yeah, Trek has always been ahead of the game with all of this. I think that if there's any changes that have been happening more recently, it's that they've been more open, if that's possible, less using things as metaphors for something else, which would occasionally happen in the very, very early Trek. I think the only change is that they're still doing everything they used to do. They're just being more open about the direct parallels from the Trek universe to our world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's more freedom to, like, I think it was kind of in secrecy a little in the 60s of like, but it's fake. You can't be mad at us that we're putting these things on your television screens at home that have not been seen before. But like one little quick anecdote is that I had this very amazing moment in season 1. We were doing a cast read through, and it was a day we were shooting, so we all came to the table dressed in what we were wearing. So there were aliens there, and there were, every color, every type of person just all sitting around. And I just looked down the table, and Saru was sitting there, and he's an alien Kelpian. And I was just like, I love that he has like equal space at this table. And like, it was this meta moment of like, wow, this show really does create space for everyone, and everyone to share a table and pull up a seat and hang out and be heard.
So thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. I want to thank Blue and Emily. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing some of your magic here with us today. So really appreciate it. And we've come to the end of our first day 1. How was that, folks? There is a networking session, of course, so don't leave just yet. There's drinks to be had. 5th floor outside on the hotel side, I believe. Is that right? So we hope to see you all there. Again, thank you so much, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. I'll take those. It's been such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Feel the thunder, lightning and the thunder, thunder, thunder. Feel the thunder, lightning and the thunder, thunder, thunder. Feel the thunder, lightning and the thunder, thunder, thunder. Feel the thunder, lightning and the thunder, thunder, thunder. Feel the thunder, lightning and the thunder, thunder. Thunder. Turn it up. Somebody